This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Welcome to this episode of the show. I want to start by jumping right into our live chat powered by Park Power. The best damn live chat of any talk show in Canada, guaranteed. And this from Erica, who kicks us off with an inquiry. She says, good morning, Real Talkers. Are we really doing the book ban again? And I understand where Erica's coming from. On our most recent episode with Supriya Dwivedi, back, by the way, the first episode of every week. We're thrilled to have her here. We covered Alberta's book ban as it was officially put into practice, as it was applied by school boards across the province. Of course, proponents of the policy, supporters of this ministerial order will say, it's not a book ban, you guys. That's disingenuous language. It's not a ban. But if we use the Edmonton Public Schools as a case study, that's sure what it came across as in what was characterized by the Premier of Alberta as vicious compliance. The Edmonton Public School Board pulling about 200 books off its shelves to get in line with Education Minister Dimitrios Nikolaitis' order that was calling or at least spirited around pulling books off library shelves, school library shelves, or at least away from young readers where they would be age inappropriate. And I think on this, nobody disagrees with that policy. Nobody believes that so-called sexually graphic or even pornographic material should be in front of young readers. Nobody thinks that. But the Edmonton Public School Board, in an act of vicious compliance, yanking 200 books off the shelves, some of them absolute classics. We're seeing it here in our live chat right now. Erica wondering in follow-up, so why did they remove books like Jaws? Why did they remove The Handmaid's Tale? Others of you are citing Maya Angelou and other well-known writers. Of course, it worked, didn't it? Because it got everybody's attention. The Edmonton Public Schools move, of course, resonating across the province as it gleaned international attention, including from renowned world-famous author Margaret Atwood, of course, she who penned The Handmaid's Tale, who, as we outlined in our most recent episode of the show, put out her own short story criticizing Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith, calling her out in the spirit or the tone of The Handmaid's Tale. Ms. Atwood responding with several quips in follow-up in social media. She was speaking to a group, by the way, in Poland, and this was live-streamed globally. And so all of a sudden, you've got The Guardian, and you've got BBC, and you've got international news outlets covering this, writing about this. A tough look for Alberta, right? Margaret Atwood writing, The Handmaid's Tale came true, and Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith found herself with a nice new blue dress, but no job. A reference to the wives of the commanders in that book, The Handmaid's Tale, which symbolizes restrictive and totalitarian societies. So, what does the government do? About an hour and a half after Supriya and I take this on, not saying, just saying, but they press pause on the policy. They press pause on the ministerial order, suggesting that the spirit of the order is being misinterpreted or at least misapplied by schools across the province. And it looks, quite frankly, really bad for Alberta, not just across Canada, not just in Ontario, where Supriya was checking in from, going, yeah, all of us are kind of watching this, including, she says, conservatives, including libertarians who really don't believe that this is the right way to do things, but instead eyes of the world on this story. But Danielle Smith doesn't say we're pressing pause to circle back and evaluate whether or not this is something we should even be doing. No, she says new rules are on the way, and the government's going to be getting more specific in the types of books or the types of literature or material that it wants to see out of schools. It's getting nastier. It's getting more tense. I saw on The National last night on CBC, a spokesperson for one of the parents' rights groups, the Rights for Parents in Education, quoted on this. They're one of the groups, the special interest groups, the lobby groups that have been calling for this action. And the gentleman says, well, when a parent gives a directive to a child and the child spins that directive as something else, the parent doesn't drop it. The parent circles back and reapplies that directive. So the metaphor even that proponents of this policy are using as the parent who knows best and the child in their beautiful, naive nature is telling us a little bit about the spirit of all this and who's really asking for it and why. Now, of course, all of this amid a looming teacher strike is only creating more of a tense and probably counterproductive atmosphere between the government and Alberta's teachers, leaving, I would suspect, hundreds of thousands of families to wonder what's going on, and perhaps more importantly for their own schedules and their kids' education, what does this mean moving forward? What do the next number of weeks or months look like, not just for our family, not just for our kids' school, but for education in Alberta? In this episode of Real Talk, you're going to hear from two different voices, one of them a political scientist who probably sits in the middle of the political spectrum, or maybe he'll tell us he even leans a little left, and then you'll hear from a conservative political commentator, both of their perspectives on this to a certain degree aligning. I want to keep jumping back into the live chat throughout this. You guys are an incredibly important part of this show, and your perspectives matter on this. You fuel the editorial direction of this show in a lot of ways. And some of you are like Boomshanker X says, I think that everybody is actually probably confused as to what the details are on this ministerial order, right? Kathy says, this sounds to me like that sort of vicious compliance worked pretty well on Edmonton Public's behalf. Says, I'm glad to hear that they're pumping the brakes on this book ridiculousness, at least for a moment. EK says, after seeing the list of removed books, I can't really figure out what the offensive content is that they're looking for. The list seems totally random. Jay says the UCP finally got exposed for the hypocrites they are. Playing with culture war issues can get you burned, and they're flying a little too close to the flame. Lefty Lance says Danielle Smith now has the problem that none of the books she wants banned meet her new definition of what should be banned, right? Her Mott and Bailey strategy has failed. Bruce says this is book censorship, plain and simple, which is the act of restricting access to books due to images, ideas, or information contained. Tony says, let's not forget that all of this BS is just a distraction from the actual rot that is this government. Tony says scandal after scandal, and they're focusing on books and trans kids. Let's be smarter here. Well, let's check in with our first guest here in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. Dr. Duane Bratt is a political scientist at Mount Royal University out of Calgary, and always a fabulous dance partner here on the show. Duane, it's nice to see your face again. Were you surprised at all to see the UCP press pause on this ministerial order?
Well, I had assumed that the pause was due to the pushback from the Edmonton Public School Board, the intervention by Margaret Atwood, the national, international mockery. I did not realize that the pause was due to Ryan Jesperson and Supriya Dwivedi.
Yes.
So I've learned something already.
I mean, I just am drawing lines between dots. That's all I'm doing here.
Just because something happens before something else does not mean it caused it.
I think they call that correlation, not causation, right?
Yeah. I would also talk about this. Is it a book ban? Because both the minister and the premier have really pushed back on the book ban. So here's their justification. One is they're not putting forward a list of books to ban. Instead, what they did is provide a list of regulations that forced school boards to ban books. So the government isn't banning books. The Edmonton Public Board is banning books based on the regulations the government wrote. The second is the word ban never appears in the ministerial order.
Yeah, of course not.
Instead, they use phrases like must not select for inclusion, must not permit any children to access. So not banning, just we're not giving you access. So are you banned from this bar, Ryan? No, you just are not permitted to enter.
Okay.
But it's not a ban.
For the record, Duane, I've never been banned from any bar. As a matter of fact, most bar owners
You've probably been thrown out of a few.
I might have been tossed from a couple and invited to come back, but I think bar owners are typically pretty happy when they see our crew rolling in. Yeah.
So which you didn't also mention because there was so much going on yesterday.
Yeah.
Like my day began giving an interview about the book, Not a Ban. to the New York Times in the morning.
Wow.
Then the pause occurred. Then we got the tweets from Nicolaitis and from Smith explaining why they were pausing the ban. And then last night, Minister Nicolaitis outlined all of the school libraries and schools in two boards, Calgary Public, Edmonton Public, the largest in the province, that carried these four books that they have really emphasized, these four graphic novels like Blankets and Flamer, that all have the same LGBTQ theme, right? So I think there's something there as well. And when he released it, he also then released, and why that was interesting is two of the schools at Ross Shepherd and Roslyn, they were using it in the classroom. They were actually using these as textbooks, both Blankets and Flamer, which would have been exempted from the Ministerial Order about the use of textbooks. The second is the vast majority were high schools, some junior highs, and some K-12. So the narrative that these books are flooding elementary schools and that elementary students are reading graphic novels filled with pornography didn't fit with the list that the minister put out. So I was glad the minister put out the list. It was a degree of transparency, but it doesn't fit their narrative unless you're saying in a K-12 school or a K-9 school that the books have to be at the level of the lowest age, at grades 2, grades 1, kindergarten, not at the highest grades. Or for some reason, there's no discrepancy either in the library or the librarians or separate libraries between grades. So that was also interesting last night.
Do you think I thought a lot of people are almost commending or applauding Edmonton Public in particular for pulling these 200 books off the shelves? I guess vicious compliance is a pretty effective phrase invoked by Alberta's premier, and it also grabbed everybody's attention. I was quoting out of our live chat right out of the gates on purpose because people are going, "Why is The Handmaid's Tale pulled? Why is Maya Angelou being pulled? Why is Jaws being pulled?" A bit of a publicity stunt, but it was obviously effective.
I think it was more than a publicity stunt. It met the standard that was put forward because the ministerial order had no room for context. So I referenced the Fountainhead last night, and there are clear passages in the Fountainhead around explicit sexual conduct and content that led to it being removed. It's also a 750-page work. And that is a small part of the overall theme of the Fountainhead. But the ministerial order didn't give room for context. Prior to the order, we had room for context. And so that's the problem that they're coming into. Same with some of these graphic novels that are 100, 200 pages long, and they're highlighting the same page over and over again. And assuming that this is in the hands of elementary students. So Edmonton Public went public with this list. You cannot tell me that no other school board was doing similar stuff, or the order existed well beyond libraries to school classroom collections that were brought by teachers. And one of the things that they had to do by the 1st of October was catalog every book in the school, not just in the library, because those are already cataloged, but in every classroom. And instead of complying with that order, they simply removed everything. And you may say, well, that's malicious compliance. It's actually, that's the term that's often used, not vicious compliance. Well, what happens if you don't remove the wrong book and you get some parents group that plays a game of gotcha? Or are you going to take the time to actually catalog these away from preparing for classes and all those other things? So there was lots of things in that order. And by the way, the order came out in early July when teachers were on holidays. And this is also in the atmosphere of a likely either strike or lockout of teachers.
Yeah. Hey, where's your head at on that, by the way? I know that it's at this point, it's speculation unless you've got the inside track. We're working sources over here to get a sense of where the teachers are at, to get a sense of where the government's at with this. But are you feeling the same?
Until there's a settlement, we're going to be on a razor's edge.
Yeah.
Right.
That could be at any moment.
It could be at any moment. Well, they have to give notice. The teachers have to give notice. You don't have to give notice for a lockout. But the teachers have to give 72 hours, which would give time for parents to prepare. They have paused that, but they're not negotiating. The fact that they had competing press conferences in different cities tells you the state of negotiation. And I've had parents going, well, why do they always strike at the beginning of the school year or threaten to strike at the beginning of the school year? Why can't they do this in July and August?
Right.
This causes inconvenience for parents.
That's the point.
Yeah, that's the point of a strike. The point of a strike is to cause inconvenience, to put pressure on the government. So I think it's more likely than not that we're going to have some sort of strike. I hope not. I hope a settlement emerges. But we need to put all of this stuff, including the sporting stuff around transgender athletes. This is all going on the first day of school yesterday.
Yeah, this is in our live chat powered by Park Power. Get exclusive discounts on internet, electricity, and natural gas at parkpower.ca/realtalk. This is an interesting comment from Tracy, who says teachers know how to follow instructions. If the government provides incompletely written, or maybe she wants me to say incompetently written instructions, they get what they deserve. Randy, thinking back a few years, says the Edmonton Public School Board sounds a lot like management at the city of Edmonton in the 1990s when responding to, I believe it was Klein's proposed budget cuts. Okay, well, we're going to close pools and libraries. Just do your job, get the erotic crap out and quit grandstanding. That from Randy, who's not exactly supporting the move. I mean, is it grandstanding? Is it doubling down on the position that the board has taken? Is it effective posturing, do you think, Duane? I mean, like the school board, Edmonton Public Schools doesn't really have anything to lose at this point. They're being big dogged by the government, right?
Yeah, there's also a lot more context being at play here because we have municipal elections that include school board trustees in 6 weeks' time.
Yep.
That's all part of this. You have the Take Back Alberta folks that want to take back school boards, school board trustees. That's part of that. If you look at the activists that Nicolaitis was meeting with, that led to this discussion about 4 graphic novels, that led to the Ministerial Order, that led to 200 book bans, those women were upset. Some of those women were upset because they believe schools turn their child gay and that these types of books did that. So there is the fact that these are all queer books that have been banned in the United States, that there are connections to book ban groups in the U.S. with the groups in Alberta that met with the minister. That's all part of it. So we need to look at the culture war context of schools, but there's even more politics at play here. But I'll just leave the schools for a moment.
Yeah, I'm asking you to really tap into your memory bank here, and I'll acknowledge I've seen the movie, not read the book. One of the great movies of all time, of course, one of Steven Spielberg's first big splashes, if you'll permit the dad joke, with Jaws. But Dubious says, I'm trying to recall what sexual content is in Jaws. Is it the beginning?
Who was the first
where
victim
they
in
go
Jaws?
Skinny dipping? Is it the skinny dipper?
Yeah.
That's 2 points for Dubious. So now all of a sudden we're going to ban books where there's skinny dipping, even if it's just written about, not pictured?
The Ministerial Order said written, not just images. It was a hugely sweeping order because and the Premier tweeted this. She says, look, this is simple. We want to keep pornography out and we want to keep the classics in, and everybody knows the difference.
Yeah, MA says there's
what is pornography?
Well, yeah, what is pornography? Let's have the conversation. What is pornography?
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge. Is it simply the depiction of a naked body? And some people believe that that's pornographic. Is it access between two people? Is it the sucking of a breast nipple? Well, what about breastfeeding, right? There are numerous court cases trying to figure out what pornography is. And I keep going back to the famous U.S. Supreme Court justice who goes, it's simple. I know it when I see it. The problem is I may know when I see it, but you may not know. What about when we throw the rest of the context? If I was just to show you the passages from Jaws and The Handmaid's Tale and The Fountainhead and the couple pages of the graphic novel, you would go, yeah, that's pornography and should be banned. What about the other 600 pages, 100 pages, 150 pages? What about the overall context of that? Is it art or is it titillation? Those are real issues, real challenging issues. And that's why I've got faith and trust in the education system, in the librarians and the teachers who deal with this on a regular basis.
I want to let people know if they want to get a little bit more specific into this. We, on the 29th of July, I'm showing it to you now on my screen, we had the Education Minister, Dimitrios Nikolaitis, debate the past president of the Library Association of Alberta. That was Laura Winton on the show. And Johnny, you can just keep letting it roll. It'll come up here in a second. We did display some of the images and some of the pages in question in the specific works that were cited by the government, including, as we're showing here right now, Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. And you can see that there are depictions of oral sex, there are depictions of masturbation, and I know that we've had debates on the show. I don't know that we need to relitigate this on where the value may lie in those and what age appropriateness looks like and how those could prompt conversations or better understanding of consent or a million different things. And I don't know that we need to continue to debate that, but at the end of the day, what really matters at this point is where does this all go and what are the ultimate implications? You know, it's been described, included by me yesterday in a post, Duane, as a culture war distraction. If the government continues to double down on this, I mean, pressing pause is one step. Some people may see that as a bit of a conciliatory move. But if it circles back with either more heavy-handed directives, a more heavy-handed or specific ministerial order, what have you, or this continues to glean the international attention, that's the last thing that any government wants, trying to attract new citizens, trying to attract international investment. I mean, how high are the stakes here? How bad could this get for this government?
I think reputationally, it's already been a hit, and I've talked about some of the stakes at play here. I don't think you can divorce this from the contract negotiations. I don't think you can divorce this from the upcoming school board trustee elections. But I want to take a step back and look at a broader, wider political aspect that the Smith government has been pursuing in this province. And that is micromanaging almost every aspect of Alberta politics, from changing election rules around municipalities, to deciding whether bike lanes should be in municipalities, to firing the heads of Alberta Health Services and AIMCO, to some of the restrictions they're imposing on post-secondaries. So there is a centralization of authority that has occurred under the Smith government that most conservatives previously believed in decentralized authority. Everything is becoming centralized more and more in the Alberta government. And we're seeing that not just with schools, not just with books, but everything else. So I think there is a theme here that needs to be included.
This from Blast Sheep says, if the school board wants to be handheld, fine. Let them have their hissy fit and the UCP can enact common sense. Tommy Temper says age-inappropriate books need to be removed, period. Emily touches on something that you briefly mentioned and I think is worth our attention today. Emily G says, it's ridiculous and embarrassing that I have to sign forms this fall that my daughter or my daughters were born without a penis. I'll reference Emily Williams reporting on this with the CBC. Of course, everybody knows this, although I think the story is flying under the radar a little bit, relatively speaking. New provincial rules in Alberta banning trans athletes from female divisions came into effect September 1st, just a couple of days ago. Parents of students 12 and older must now sign a form to confirm their sex at birth for students in girls' sports in Edmonton's public schools. This is the Fairness and Safety in Sport Act that has set new rules prohibiting transgender athletes from competing in amateur female sports divisions, says Vanessa Gomez, the press secretary for the Ministry of Tourism and Sport, quote, "Sport is for everyone, which is why Alberta's government is working to make sport safe, fair, and accessible for all Albertans." Duane, I will say this. Polling-wise, this isn't as unpopular as some people might think, but it's obviously a first in Canada, and for that reason, it's got a lot of people paying attention. It all kind of fits together as one narrative.
Oh, absolutely. This is part of their transgender policy, and I will say, and the regulations here meet with this. It's all about males transitioning to females.
Yeah.
None of this is about females transitioning to males. So keep that in mind. There's a specific aspect here that's at play. Like back in the dark days when we had battles over gays, it was always about gay men, not gay women. So it's about female sports in schools, in K-12 schools. Not only do you have to sign a special form identifying your child as female, there's also a challenge procedure. So if I think that girl on that volleyball team is a bit too tall, I can challenge her gender.
That's insane.
And provide information around that. This goes well beyond minors. Universities, colleges are having to do the same thing. Provincial sport associations are having to do the same thing. This is across the board. And yes, it is popular because they frame it as, and this is also interesting language, do you want men competing against girls? Do you want men in girls' change rooms? It's not, do you want boys with girls? It's men and girls, not men and women, men and girls. And that's the way it's framed. So this is more of the culture wars. How many trans children in school are there? How many of those are actual athletes? This is massive overkill once again. And I know I'm going to be attacked for that.
Well,
because it is popular, because they phrase it as, Ryan, do you want Duane Bratt to compete against your 13-year-old daughter in a basketball game?
Right. Yeah. I think, by the way, like giving parents, opposing parents, especially the right to challenge the gender of athletes that their children are competing against is wild and completely inappropriate. It's going to lead to heated situations. I guarantee it. Anybody that's been to any game and seen parents behave.
You're just starting your life as a hockey parent.
This is true.
And you're going to see accusations in the stands. And this existed well before. That kid's overage. He's too good. And it's extended to gender as well. And that's just going to highlight things.
Yeah.
I've been involved in amateur youth sport my entire life. There's a lot of crazy parents out there who are going to make raising these challenges.
Yeah.
And what does that do to the poor child and the stigmatization of that child? And that was already occurring. Now you've created an official framework to challenge.
And this is only, like, it's one thing if you're challenging a child's age, right? Oh, I think that kid's an overager. I think that there's no way that kid's a 2015 born. They're a 2013. It's way different if you're challenging a child's gender, or if you're challenging like matters of identity. It's going to be supercharged. I wouldn't be surprised to see parents screaming at each other in the stands. I wouldn't be surprised to see it get worse than that. But like I said, I think that the premise or the principle of that policy is probably more popular among the members of the public than people might think. It's not. I don't doubt it's popular. Like, I don't think it's nearly as risky as the book policy.
No, because it affects a much smaller group of people. You can frame it in the issue of fairness in defending female sports and pushing down on minorities, especially really small minorities, is usually really popular. That's why we have Charter of Rights to protect those vulnerable people. But this. The sport issue is only, of course, one prong of their entire transgender policy, right? The rest is around pronouns, on surgeries, and it's not just under the age of 18. It includes over the age of 18. So we need to put this in context with the books.
Duane,
at least in this respect, because they're both involving schools.
Well, yeah, I mean, no, there's definitely, I mean, it feels like, and that's how members of the public will perceive it. When people are talking over beers or coffees on the sideline at soccer tryouts, they're going to be saying, like, did you see like this, and this, and for people, it's like, people, and this, folks are not to blame for this. We have short attention spans. We're flooded with information, but people see headlines around them, and these are the dominant headlines when it comes to the province of Alberta right now. I'll quote a statement from the leader of Alberta's official opposition, Nad Nenshi, said just a couple of hours ago, as a matter of fact, between last episode and today's, yet again, an attempt by the UCP to distract from their horrific record has backfired. They're still making it up as they go along, leaping from crisis to crisis. We have the lowest funding per student in the country, which is true. Says the teachers are about to go on strike. True. Class sizes have never been larger. True. And what does Premier Smith think is important? Asking girls, not boys, to prove their sex and banning books. He goes on to say, of course, material must be age appropriate. Nobody disagrees with that. But instead of funding teacher librarians, creating common sense guidelines, they wrote a poorly thought out ministerial order that the minister himself didn't understand when he introduced it. What did they think would happen? Says Nenshi, yet again, their own incompetence and inability to manage complex files has led to wasted time, wasted money, and unneeded stress. Albertans deserve better. We're about approximately a month away from fall session resuming at the Alberta legislature, and you have to assume that the NDP is chomping at the bit for this, but I guarantee the average Albertan that's looking for answers to trade deficits, to tariffs, to economic challenges, to growth challenges in the province of Alberta, this is the last thing that they want to see in question period dominating. Would you agree?
I think so. But those that care an awful lot, and they had access to the government on this ministerial order. I found it appalling when the minister admitted he hadn't read the 4 graphic novels in question. Said, I'm a minister of the Crown. I don't have time to read novels, let alone 4 of them. I would have thought if this was really about 4 graphic novels, and it appears to be so, that you would have taken the time to read them. That's just me, but I'm a reader. The challenge the government had is they wanted these gone. They needed to support the activists that had come to them, but they didn't want to do the dirty work themselves. They didn't want to put a list of books banned, because if you put 4, what about the 5th one? What about the 6th one? So they wanted the schools to do that, but they wrote the regulations of the ministerial order in such a sweeping fashion that it covered everybody. So some people here on Wednesday are going to focus on, oh my God, they're banning Atlas Shrugged, or they're banning the Fountainhead. And others are going to circulate those photos of the 4 graphic novels. So where you stand depends upon where you sit.
Duane Bratt steers the ship at Calgary's Mount Royal University, where he's a professor of political science and always a valued voice on this show. Thanks for joining us, Duane. We appreciate your perspective.
Okay, thanks, Ryan.
Yep, you got it. Take care. Duane Bratt, of course, featured here on Real Talk, courtesy of our friends at Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West, the best or nothing. Up next, we'll get to political commentator and podcaster. Do we say substacker? I don't think so. I don't think it's an adjective. But Rob Breakenridge has been doing heavy lifting on this and other stories, and we want to get his perspective on this. Rob, typically perceived as more of a conservative voice, so I was curious to see how he would assess what had developed over the past 24 hours or so. I want to continue to jump back into the Real Talk live chat, powered by Park Power. Some excellent points here from those of you that are coming at this from different directions. Not everybody agrees, by the way. Like Michael says, what about the Premier's favorite book? I think he's talking about Ayn Rand. He says that also met the sexual criteria from the Ministerial Order. I think that was part of the cheeky nature of it, right? Vamp Fashions says any controversy that gets the Handmaid's Tale pulled is a good and noble project. Emily is watching us on Facebook. Thanks for tuning in, Emily. She says it was an act of subtle, smart protest. She's talking about what they did in Edmonton Public Schools. Tracy says this is plain and simple. It's a slam against teachers. The government continuously suggesting that teachers can't be trusted to make good, age-appropriate choices. Christy says this is all just ridiculous in the internet age. This is frankly just stupid. I think Christy's probably alluding to the fact that virtually all information and content is available on the World Wide Web right now, especially in households where parents either aren't interested or aren't able to keep track of what their kids are accessing all the time. Ms. B says the government has been waging a very long, like a 10 years plus smear campaign against teachers. And so teachers and school boards are using the very highly government-controlled choices that they have to fight back. Very simple. Plain Power says it's a shame that the drafters of that ministerial order worded it so vaguely, a depiction of sexual material. Stephen says children shouldn't be exposed to Orwell. You can let us know what you think. Ben says in today's day and age, there's a minimum of at least 15 ways for kids, for teenagers to get access to porn. And I think we can all agree on that. Yeah. But why should graphic serial acts be in public libraries? Ms. Katie also wondering if Duane and I coordinated our shirt choices today. Both of us wearing quite loud tarps today, Duane and I. Sorry, not sorry, Still nice weather. Summer's not officially yet done, at least not in my mind, so I'm going to keep rocking these things because it makes me feel as though we're still going to squeeze out some patio days, maybe some days on the golf course. As a matter of fact, that's what some buddies and I did just a few days ago. I reached out to our friends at Tourism Jasper. I said, would you be okay with us sort of indulging a bit of a personal adventure for this week's episode of MyJasper Memories? And of course, once we showed them the photos, they said, well, fill your boots. You got to share these. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. Just before we check in with Rob Breakenridge, every week on Wednesdays, courtesy of our friends at Tourism Jasper, we have a chance to, transport ourselves, at least our imaginations, out to Jasper National Park, remind ourselves of the memories waiting to be made out there. I've told you guys I'm a huge nerd, right? I'm a huge geek. Our 29th annual CFHL, that's the Canadian Fantasy Hockey League draft, taking part in BC over the Labor Day long weekend. Can you believe we've been doing this almost 30 years? I said to the fellas, including those in Calgary, they would typically just travel on the Highway 1 and they would find their way out to Shuswap without even going near Jasper National Park. I said, fellas, the course is looking absolutely unbelievable right now. They're commemorating their 100th year at this Stanley Thompson design course. And of course, everybody has been working so hard, not just at the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge, but across the town. Hoteliers, restaurateurs, those that are working in the tourism space, tour guides and the like, of course, to get Jasper back to a place where they can welcome folks with open arms. I said, boys, we got to go and dump some cash out there. We got to invest in this national park that we love so dearly. So that's exactly what they did. The Calgary boys, a contingent from Brooks, Alberta, detoured up and traveled with us in a golf convoy on Highway 16 West to check out the magnificent and #1 golf resort in Canada. Look at that. That's the purest golf swing I've ever seen in my life. That's Jeff Chivers, the general manager of the Hamilton Hounds in the Canadian Fantasy Hockey League. But these guys were absolutely wowed. We had perfect conditions out there, perfect weather. We could not have asked for a better day. Look at this smile. Look at these smiles of these four fellas. We were lucky enough. This is on one of the iconic tee boxes there on JPL's magnificent golf course. Of course, these were the smiles before we hit our tee shots. Although everybody did all right. I think we had 4 fairway shots there, Johnny, if you could believe it. That's a rarity. But absolute lifetime memories being made there on the shore of Lac Beauvert. Now, we were lucky enough to be able to stay in one of those ridgeline cabins at the Fairmont. These are perfect for families or even a group of families. They've got 3 primary ensuite bedrooms in each one of them and a wonderful kitchen and dining area. So for us, after a quick stop at Friesen Brothers to pick up a big prime rib, it was time to dine and recount the stories from the course that day. Yes, we are all wearing matching t-shirts. I told you, we're nerds, we're geeks. Johnny went with that warm potato salad as well. Stu, GM of the Brooks Bronkbusters, kind enough per tradition to bring us some Tabor corn, sourced from exactly where it grows. The fellowship in that place, absolutely fantastic. We stayed there, of course, stayed up all night, just sharing laughs, catching up, and just taking in the vibes. Now, the next morning outside the ridgeline, check this out. This is just the quiet of morning. I poured myself a coffee and just sat out there by myself. You can see, of course, just take in the landscape, see the changes there that the fire imposed. And then, of course, nature bringing itself back. Absolutely magnificent. The peace and the calm out there is essentially unparalleled. Then, of course, before we hit the highway to British Columbia, we had to take a few moments to soak in that tub. This is my favorite hot tub in Canada. Of course, at the Fairmont, every single moment's going to be a memorable one. And we sat there and just kind of gathered our thoughts before we hit the road. Now, we weren't going to hit the highway without grabbing a bite to eat. And I was telling you in a previous edition of MyJasper Memories about this brand new spot, Otto's Cash. I hadn't yet had a chance to pop in myself, so we did exactly that. And as you can see, this is a beautiful, the design in this space is incredible, and I'm happy to tell you that their service offerings match the first impression. Grab myself a nice latte, different sandwiches that you can choose, kind of a sandwich joint, but they've got nice little mementos that you can take with you, thermoses. Of course, you can grab the whole bean coffee if you'd like on the road, and I had to snap this photo. This was the Reuben with a beautiful red cabbage, which I would highly recommend. That's Otto's Cash, right on Connaught, right on the main drive there. This is just one of many incredible offerings that you can find in Jasper. Again, they are wide open right now for business, and the weather looking over these next few weeks makes this a no-brainer. If you're looking for somewhere to gather with your friends, somewhere to take the family before the leaves start to fall, may I humbly recommend Jasper National Park. You can plan out your own vacation. You can learn more about the cabin capital of Canada. Again, you've still got time to squeeze out a little bit of summer. The website jasper.travel will take you right there, and there are some amazing resources courtesy of our friends at Tourism Jasper. Find inspiration for your next visit. Discover Jasper there. And a reminder coming up this weekend, you can set into the wild heart of Jasper National Park, where music and mountains meet. It's the Jasper Folk Music Festival running September 5th and 6th. You can get your tickets. Check out the lineup. There's like 15 bands over the 2 days. It's a family-friendly event at jasperfolkmusicfestival.ca. If you're out there, we'd love to hear about your trip. You can hashtag MyJasper and Real Talk RJ, and you could be featured on an upcoming episode of MyJasper Memories, which is proudly presented weekly, every Wednesday, here on Real Talk by our friends at Tourism Jasper. All right, well, let's get to the next voice. We want to check in on this. We always want different perspectives on the stories that we're covering, and this was a headline that jumped right off the page at me as I was reading the Calgary Herald online at calgaryherald.com. My former radio colleague and good friend Rob Breakenridge. The headline, "Blame for Disastrous School Book Ban Lies Squarely with Who Issued the Order." He's a political commentator. He's a podcaster. You can subscribe to his Substack. It's a pleasure to welcome Rob Breakenridge back to the show. Rob, you don't mince words. A disastrous school book ban. How long did it take you to come to that conclusion?
And look, I think the Edmonton Public School Board did help move this conversation along. I think people are going to sort of speculate about what kind of motives were there. Look, it's worth noting no one from Edmonton Public Schools came out and, held some big flashy news conference. They did their diligence as per the Ministerial Order and found the books and the materials that would apply. So, but when you read the Ministerial Order, and it seems to me, I think a lot of people defending the government, perhaps even some people in government, didn't actually read the Ministerial Order. So it was very sweeping, was very overarching. And so it's no surprise that you see all of these books caught up in that net. So I don't know what else Edmonton Public Schools was supposed to do. You can just imagine the fallout going the other way. If they just said, well, we'll leave that book on the shelf, it's probably okay. And then down the road, someone gets all upset and says, I can't believe they still have this book. Didn't they read the order? So, they were kind of, catch-22, right? They were going to get criticized either way. But I think just kind of exposed how ill-conceived or ill thought out this all was in the first place.
People can read your work. People can check out your podcast at robbreakenridge.substack.com. And of course, we'll link to that in the show notes on the podcast and on YouTube as well. But a big part of how you've made your career as a columnist and as a broadcaster is getting into the political strategy behind moves that governments make by way of legislation, ministerial orders or otherwise, and also speculating around or analyzing the long-term ramifications here. And so I have to ask you, the way that this is going right now, the fact that the government had to press pause and is now doubling down and coming across as more heavy-handed, the fact that they're being mocked by Margaret Atwood, that this story's being covered by the BBC and the Guardian and Al Jazeera and big international news agencies. I mean, does this qualify as a backfire right now? Like, how bad could this get? Behind closed doors with shields up, is this government right now probably entering or already in damage control mode?
Oh, 100%, right? I mean, this has become a huge fiasco. And again, I think it's all of their own making, as much as the premier or her allies want to lash out at Edmonton Public Schools or, people in the media. They created this whole mess in the first place. And I think, Duane Bratt alluded to it. There's these 4 graphic novels, probably one in particular, this book, Gender Queen, which has been at the center of controversies, certainly in a number of U.S. states. I think they thought that, look, nobody's really going to step forward and defend this kind of content, but those who are really pressuring the government to get rid of this stuff, they're going to be happy. So I think they saw this as a win-win. We'll yank these books, and there's not going to be much of a pushback, but I think those that want it gone will be happy, and that'll be that. And it could have been that, because no, I don't think a lot of people really would have come to the defense of that, or certainly not in younger grades. And I think, as it turns out, this mostly was in high schools anyway. But then it went much further than that, because, well, we can't just include pictures. We have to include any kind of description. And so what counts as sexual content? And, the passages I mentioned in my column that come from Atlas Shrugged very clearly meet the definition. And so how bizarre was it then for the premier to say, well, maybe Atlas Shrugged should be mandatory reading in schools. So you have a book that the premier thinks should be in schools, and according to the ministerial order from her government, should not be in any schools. Like, you can't have it both ways. And it falls back at her feet. I mean, they're the ones that brought this forward. They're the ones that designed this. They're the ones that put out the orders to school boards. So who else would be to blame here? Yeah,
I think Atlas, putting Atlas Shrugged on the list or banning it from the library, probably the most well-known work by Ayn Rand is one of the cheekier moves that I saw. Flying under the radar, Edmonton's Public isn't exactly crowing about it, but the premier has long referenced Ayn Rand. I saw her referred to in an international news piece. I think it was about a year ago. I'll double check as soon as you start talking. As Ayn Rand in cowboy boots. That's one that probably has to hit close to home. This ends up being, I think, pretty embarrassing for the government, does it? And I have to imagine from the tone that I saw from the premier yesterday, probably pretty pissed off, to be honest with you. This is no doubt it's worsening the relationship between the government and teachers across the province, which is the last thing that parents want to see right now. I imagine they're hoping to see a deal get struck, but the tone of those negotiations right now have probably never been worse.
Yeah, you can tell when Danielle Smith is upset, and it was pretty clear just from her tone how upset she was. And I think it stems from the embarrassment here. They didn't want to back down. They didn't want to have to go back to the drawing board on this, but I think they had no choice. And so, yes, it was the coverage. It was the international coverage around all of this, and the embarrassment that caused. I don't think the government... I think they had no choice but to back down. I don't see how they could have proceeded here or try to have it both ways to say, no, you should leave those books on the shelf, even though they very clearly meet the definition of what should not be on the shelf in the first place. So they do need to fix this, and hopefully they do fix it, because I think there are some reasonable conversations to be had about appropriate content and what should be in elementary schools or middle schools or high schools or this sort of thing. It is similar. It's funny because the other day I talked about how we sort of got what conservatives call the woke left, but we've kind of got the woke right here. A couple of years ago, in one Ontario school division, the Peel school division, there was a huge controversy that they were pulling books, with outdated or politically incorrect language. And you can make an argument that maybe kids shouldn't be exposed to what we would now consider to be somewhat racist. But when you're pulling all of these classic books off the shelves, you're banning it from high schools, it was an example of kind of the woke left going a little bit too far. And I think you see at times some of these books, like Margaret Atwood, have been a target in other school divisions or other jurisdictions. It's kind of the woke right saying, yeah, we don't want explicitly sexual content in elementary schools, but this idea that no students at any grade should be exposed to anything at all sexual. It's kind of an example of what we could call the woke right and their sense, their censorious impulses.
Stephen is in our live chat, powered by Park Power, says, whether you're a UCP supporter or not, this is a weird priority for the Smith government. Says this is going to hurt them in the long run. Can you see this be coming? I mean, it feels like we're like ages away from a provincial election, but you do have Naheed Nenshi and his NDP chomping at the bit to get into fall session. Nenshi's not yet been in the Alberta legislature as a representative or as the leader of the official opposition. I suggested to Dr. Bratt, sounds like you may have heard it, that I think that this is probably the last thing that Albertans are looking for, that the general public wants is a bunch of quarreling and a bunch of hand grenades being tossed over a book ban or trans athletes in elementary or junior high schools. But if you're the official opposition, this is exactly where you're going to take that mid-October.
I think it is a fine line here because I don't think Albertans are generally socially conservative. And I think the UCP runs into trouble when they cater too much to social or religious conservatives. But I think at the same time, some of these issues around pronouns or names in schools, I think even, their parents are not necessarily socially conservative, sort of say, yeah, I do want to know what's going on with my kid in schools, right? So some of what the UCP has done, I think, does seem to have some general or broad support, not necessarily just from social conservatives. And I think initially, singling out these graphic novels and showing this content and saying potentially this could be accessible to, elementary school kids, you're not going to run into controversy. You're not going to have a big public backlash if you say those books shouldn't be in those schools. But when it gets to this ridiculous degree, I think that's where the government runs into problems, where you're really catering to social conservatives in a way that I don't think people understand or can relate to. I don't think people really believe that these books should not be accessible for high school students because of how important, significant, and historical they are. So I think by overplaying their hand here, what was not a political liability, I think has really become one. Now, whether this has any lasting impact, I guess, who knows what next week's controversy might be, but I think they've been really stung by this.
Lorraine in our live chat says pretty soon the UCP is going to be standing outside women's washrooms asking to see your vagina before you could use the washroom. It's insane. Mark says, once again, this government is responding to a Wild Rose base that's plugged into American culture wars. Supriya Dwivedi yesterday talking about Ron DeSantis and the premier's affinity for Governor DeSantis and the trips down to Florida and the like. You say that you don't believe that Albertans are socially conservative, and to a certain degree, I agree with you. I also think that many Albertans are socially conservative, among the most socially conservative in the country. But the province is certainly maybe not earning the reputation of or retaining the reputation of social conservatism as the rest of Canada. Maybe save Saskatchewan, kind of looks over and sneers and snickers. If we step outside just education and we talk about Alberta's reputation, which now has implications on things like talent, recruitment and retention, real estate values, the economy, international investment, millions of different angles. Could this bite Alberta in ways that maybe the government isn't even acknowledging?
Well, I hope not. I mean, when you have these headlines in the New York Times and the BBC, and the damage that does to Alberta's reputation, even and it's kind of unrelated specifically around separatism, all of these things I don't think are helpful for Alberta right now. But in terms of how much overall damage they do to, in terms of economic ramifications, I'd be careful about overstating that. But, reputation matters. And I don't think this does Alberta's reputation any favors right now.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think you also get to a point where you have to talk about pride in media and in politics. Pride and ego factor in, and I think that probably on behalf of this government, there's you get to a point where the government's like hell, going to walk away from this thing. They're not going to admit defeat on this thing. I don't think that they're going to leave it and move on to the next thing. And so that's what, to me, as I look at sort of storm clouds on the horizon, metaphorically speaking, that's where I start to get concerned, because I see all of this turning into a bigger and bigger thing. I envision, and it feels to me like a teacher's strike is inevitable. I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that it doesn't happen. It's going to screw over a ton of people. I think of the single parent families. I think of families where both parents are working. I think of grade 12 students. This is the last thing that they're going to need. But it doesn't look to me like there's any progress being made. It doesn't look to me like anybody's seeking to meet in the middle. And I just think that the average citizen is looking at this, number one, hoping that the government gets its priorities straight. Number two, hoping that something can happen to keep kids in school this fall. But I don't know. Call me a pessimist, but it just seems to me like the writing's on the wall.
Well, it feels like it, and I think there's some risk for both sides. I mean, if the teachers go on strike, it's risky, I think, for the ATA to assume that everyone's just going to be mad at the government.
Yep.
If you're the ones walking off the job, I think, there are going to be some hard questions asked of why are you doing this? On the other hand, I mean, if teachers are locked out, I think that does change the dynamic a little bit. But there is an overall issue here, whether it's teachers' strike or the book ban or other issues, just about competency. Like what's going on in Alberta right now? Why does everything seem so chaotic? Does the government really have a handle on things? So I think that's kind of the overarching risk of all of this, is a government that doesn't really seem to be in the driver's seat, or just seems to be putting out fires left and right. And so I think that's maybe the longer term issue here is, are they doing a good job running the province? And if we've got all these problems and controversies, I think it raises some questions about that. And so a strike or a lockout could play into that, even if, I think there's some questions to be asked of both sides here.
Yeah, no kidding. Rob, I also, we touched on relatively briefly Pierre Poilievre's stand on guard principle, these proposed amendments to the criminal code. And I was hoping to ask you about that. You just had an interview with Peter Sankoff, Dr. Peter Sankoff, just a while ago, and I want to get into that with you in just a second, so hang tight. We're talking to Rob Breakenridge, podcaster, a media entrepreneur. You can check out his Substack and access his show by visiting robbreakenridge.substack.com. More on that in just a moment. Real Talkers, we've been talking to you how proud we are to be partnering with and supporting UCAN Youth Services. And I wanted to let you know this new building that they've got the keys to, this is just an incredible game changer for this nonprofit charitable organization that's helping young people out of harm's way on a daily basis. And most important, they're steering them onto a path of economic independence. They're opening doors. They're manifesting opportunities. Well, they're holding a grand opening celebration to officially launch their new space in downtown Edmonton and showcase the programs that are helping Edmonton youth break the cycle of harm and crime. This event is going to welcome community members, donors, media to tour this new facility. For those of you that are local, this is on the corner of 109th Street, 104th Avenue, right by Grant MacEwan University. Your chance to connect with staff and youth and hear inspiring stories of transformation. This is Wednesday, September 10th from 2 to 6 p.m. The formal program around 3 o'clock. And you can, of course, just drop in. You'll have a chance to check in with Katie Kitschke. She's the Executive Director of UCAN Youth Services. If you'd like more information or to learn more about UCAN, even make a donation, you can check out UCAN.ca. That's the grand opening celebration Wednesday, September 10th from 2 to 6 p.m. with the formal program at 3. That's UCAN.ca. Also, big things happening with our friends at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, including their 56th annual golf tournament. I'm really, really looking forward to hosting this. It's their 56th annual tournament at the Quarry Golf and Country Club. A full day of networking, friendly competition. Emphasis on friendly as opposed to competition, and soaking up that September sunshine on one of Edmonton's premier golf courses. It's getting close to sold out, so make sure you get online and book your spot right now. You can check out the events link at edmontonchamber.com. And don't forget, they've also got their mayoral candidate forum, the mayoral debate. That's coming up on the 12th of September. Again, more details plus Read about the benefits, the many benefits of membership to the Edmonton Chamber by checking out their website. That's edmontonchamber.com. I was talking to you, our trip to Jasper, that phenomenal, by the way, for those of you that were wondering, it was a 6-pound prime rib that we had the Friesen Brothers Butchers custom cut for us, and that warm potato salad. I know I talk a lot about it, but I feel like I'm changing lives one episode at a time as I profess my love for this warm potato salad. You can find it and those real Alberta butchers at every single Friesen Brothers, 16 different locations across the province. They're celebrating 70 years this year, 2025, which means they've got a ton of different special events going on. You can always check out their website, friesen.com, for details. That's FRESON.com. Friesen Brothers is proudly Alberta grown and Alberta owned. You know who else is Alberta owned? Is California Closets, the absolute best in the business for custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home. I feel like this is the time of year where a lot of you are realizing, maybe not exactly quite yet, but pretty soon you're going to be pulling out your rakes, you're going to be pulling out your leaf blowers, and then a couple of months later, I hate to say it, you're going to be looking for your Christmas lights, your extension cords, that big inflatable Santa. You're also going to have to find a place for your summer tires, for your sprinkler and your garden hose. You know exactly what I'm getting at. You could use a garage storage system. Now, I know a lot of people take a look at these walk-in closets, the Murphy beds, and when they think of California Closets, rightfully so, that's where their head goes. But did you know that they're doing incredible work transforming garages as well, turning them into a space that you're not just going to use, but a space that you might enjoy, that you might entertain in. You can learn more about their custom-designed garage storage cabinets, the drawers, the baskets, the open storage spaces, their fusion track wall systems, and more. Even check out some of the installations that they've put in by visiting their website, californiaclosets.ca. That's also where you can request a free consultation. Every installation guaranteed for life at californiaclosets.ca. Well, of course, items in the news, stories in the news, including a recent crossbow attack, a home invasion in the province of Ontario, has prompted Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to call for changes to Canada's criminal code. He says it's not realistic that the average Canadian trying to protect their home, trying to protect their family, would be evaluating based on a criteria of 9 different qualifiers whether or not their actions to defend their property would be justified under law. Poilievre is calling for a simplification of the process. He's calling it the stand on guard principle. Our guest, podcaster and Substacker Rob Breakenridge spoke recently to Dr. Peter Sankoff, lawyer, about this. Pretty interesting interview. I had a chance to check it out myself. I recommend that others do the same. But Sankoff kind of argued that, in a way, what Poilievre is calling for is almost unnecessary. Take us into it.
Well, and it's funny because, to hear Pierre, it's one thing to say, hey, maybe we could make improvements. Maybe we should clarify some things. But to hear Pierre Poilievre denounce the language of Section 34 as, incoherent or indecipherable, or the kinds of words he was using, like the Conservatives put that there. The Conservatives made some pretty significant changes to self-defense law, starting with legislation, I think it was 2012 when they first tabled this, that actually made a lot of these kinds of improvements. It did add a lot of clarity. And so I think that's an important point in all of this is we went through all of this, and maybe it feels like a while ago now, but we did make these changes, and it was a Conservative government that made these changes. So I think that's important to note here. And, the point that Peter Sankoff made as well is that when it comes to self-defense, like there's all kinds of, situations that you might have to defend yourself in. But, the one that's probably most protected is when you're in your home. Because if you're somewhere else, he gave the example of, you're in a back alley and there's a situation, well, maybe you could get out of that alley, right? But you're in your home. There's no reasonable expectation, nor should there be, that you should have to retreat from your home. So already in the criminal code, there's some pretty strong self-defense protections, and there's that additional layer of protection that you're defending your home and you've got nowhere else to go. And so the law does recognize that. So, I think what Pierre Poilievre is suggesting, the idea that there's sort of a presumption of reasonableness, like, I don't know, maybe that could work. I don't think it's as drastic a change maybe as some have suggested, but I don't know that there's a lot wrong with the law right now as it's written, because I think you do need to allow for situations where, yes, perhaps it's not reasonable. Perhaps someone has crossed a line. One of the confusing aspects of this whole debate is, we don't know why the decision was made to charge this guy in Ontario. This case that's prompted this whole debate as to why this guy, who's the victim of a break-in or a home invasion, even you can call it, why was he charged? And, it's typical in this country where police are pretty tight-lipped about investigations. Obviously, the guy's lawyer is going to be tight-lipped. So we don't know. We're left to guess. And, so I think what fills that void is this idea that if you defend yourself, you're going to get charged. And that's not necessarily true. And so I think it would be very helpful to all of us in understanding where things are at with the law in this country to understand what happened here. Why did police decide that this guy crossed the line? Why was he charged? And does that speak to something in the law that needs to be addressed? Or was it some weird aspect of the story that we just don't know about?
Yeah, let me reference. I'll reference CTV's reporting on this. So this is a Lindsay, Ontario home. A man, approximately 3 a.m. This is Jeremy McDonald's residence. Okay, so you try to put yourself in his shoes or his slippers if he's sleeping. 3 a.m. His home is entered by a man, Michael Breen, who enters the apartment with a crossbow, say police. Now, during the altercation, McDonald, he's the homeowner. He's the guy who was sleeping, minding his own business, used a knife. And then Breen, who was the alleged home invader, the alleged criminal, sustained serious injuries and was airlifted to a Toronto hospital. Now, Breen, the alleged home invader, charged with possession of a weapon, breaking and entering, and theft. But here's the deal. The homeowner also charged with aggravated assault and assault with a weapon following the altercation that ensued in his home. And I think that's where a lot of people would have a real problem with this. As far as I'm concerned, if someone is entering my home, my property at 3 a.m, uninvited and obviously with nefarious purposes, they're going to face the full force of whatever I can throw at them. And whether that's my dogs attacking them, whether that's me hitting them with a baseball bat, whether that's me, if I am near a knife like Mr. McDonald was, and I figure that my family's safety is at risk, then come or hell or high water, I'm going to protect them. And I think that the average Canadian would feel like facing charges as a homeowner protecting themselves, woken out of a deep sleep at 3 a.m, is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, do you think that there's a decent number of people that would disagree with that?
No, I don't think so. And I think that's why this case resonates, is for that very reason. What are you supposed to do? The idea that you sort of go in stages and how you respond.
Talk him out of there.
Shout at the guy and then you assess the situation.
As he has a crossbow?
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if someone's armed. But that's the thing. It's dark. It's late at night. Maybe someone is armed and you just don't know. Or maybe these are just inherently violent people that are in your home. You don't know how the situation is going to escalate. And you don't have to sit back and assess it or ask questions or demand they leave or retreat in any way. So the law does allow for you to use self-defense in that situation. So again, what happened in this case in Ontario that this guy was charged? Now, there's been some suggestion that maybe the two knew each other, which could be a factor in how police dealt with this situation. But again, we don't really know. As to why that is. So, but again, I think, there are extreme situations. Peter Sankoff gave the example of, if you immobilize somebody and then they're down and they're not a threat anymore and you just shoot them in the head to finish them off, well, that's crossing a line. Or you get these extreme cases where, you hear the story about a drunk guy who enters the wrong apartment and passes out on the floor. Well, if you take a baseball bat to someone who's passed out on your floor, is that reasonable? Was there a threat there in the first place? So you do need to allow for, okay, what was the situation? What was going on here? But I think broadly speaking, if someone breaks into your home, you can view that as a threat and you can take steps to defend yourself. I
guess you get the odds, and we've probably all heard those anecdotes or those stories of the drunk guy that does enter the wrong apartment and like pees in someone's closet or passes out on the couch, and obviously would be a tragedy or an unfortunate situation were an otherwise law-abiding citizen to sustain life-threatening stab wounds as a result of making a mistake like that. But I mean, Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, who by the way was on fire yesterday. I'm not sure if you saw him pouring out the bottles of Crown Royal at a news conference. How great is that? By the way, people, whether you've heard Crown Royal is going to be maintaining some of its bottling facilities in Quebec and Manitoba, I believe it is, but they will no longer be actually distilling Crown Royal in Canada. And the Premier had something to say about that. Some pretty powerful images there by the Canadian press. The only thing I regretted there is it had that kind of quick pour spout there, Rob, and I think it was one of the staffers forgot. They forgot to pull the quick pour spout out, so he couldn't really get the effect of dumping out the bottle. But Ontario's Premier with an incredibly effective photo op there. But says Doug Ford about this situation, the home invasion. He says, "quote Something's broken when you can't protect your family. I know somebody breaks into my house or someone else's. You're going to fight for your life. You're going to use any force you possibly can to protect your family." He says, "I'm telling you, I know everybody would." And I'll double down on that, and I think everybody would double down on that. If I could throw somebody down the stairs and put him through a plane of glass and have my dogs attack them and hit them with a baseball bat, I would stop short of nothing there to protect my family. I will never apologize for that. That's the absolute fact. That's the absolute truth, and I think that Canadians would agree with that. I think that your interview with Peter Sankoff provides great value because people need to understand the background here. Supriya mentioned on our episode just one episode ago, again, that this was a Stephen Harper policy. Pierre Poilievre was a member of that caucus. It was a cabinet minister in that government when that was passed, so that is relevant. But I think as an effective political strategy, this could resonate. You know, the average Canadian that doesn't listen to your show, that doesn't listen to this show, might not be aware of the background. They may perceive Carney's Liberals as sort of a Trudeau 2.0 government that they see as soft on crime. They're unhappy with the lack of judicial reform. They're unhappy with continued reports from police departments, these public announcements, time and time again, that habitual, career, dangerous offenders are being released into the public, and they're going to see this as an opposition that's holding the government to account. For people that don't get too deep into the weeds on the details or the background or the history of this type of legislation, they're going to see this as a pretty astute move by Pierre Poilievre. Do you agree?
Yeah, you know, I think really where the change is needed is on the bail reform and the criminal justice side of things. I don't know that self-defense law is broken necessarily, but it does resonate. I mean, you just had a case just this week now in Ontario where a guy was killed by home invaders trying to protect his family.
Horrible.
So that's just going to ratchet up this whole conversation that this is potentially what can happen in these situations. So yeah, look, I think the government does need to speak to this and say, look, here's, you know, maybe we should better explain how things are in terms of what self-defense rights are in Canada. Like I say, some clarity on this other case in Ontario would help as well. Why was that guy charged? So to clear all of that up would be useful. But yes, I do think, you know, criminal justice remains a top concern for Canadians. It's clearly not necessarily something that's been a priority of Mark Carney's so far. But I think they do need to address this because Canadians are concerned about all of this. They hear these headlines, they see these cases, and the idea that A, I could be charged for defending myself, or B, I could end up dead as a result of a home invasion, that resonates with people, right? And so, yeah, I think that, you know, people are following this and people do care about this. And so I think the Conservatives are smart to be focusing on it and talking about it. And I don't think the government can ignore it.
Yeah, this is that was another thing, by the way, that Doug Ford commented on in his media availability. Talked about that home invasion in Vaughan that claimed the life of 46-year-old father Abdul Alim Farouki. Said the Premier, called it a sickening situation, said it's absolutely heart-wrenching. This innocent man gets his doors kicked in the middle of the night. His kids are there. His wife is there. The suspects have a gun to one of his kids. He goes to protect him, and the scumbags, says the Premier, scumbags, shot him right in front of his kids, shot him dead. Absolutely brutal story.
But, you know, and Ryan, though, we saw there was a case in Texas just this week where now a guy's been charged, I think either with manslaughter or murder, because he had some kids who were playing, you know, what do they call it? So where you ring the doorbell and ding dong dash.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I think in one case they were kind of banging on a door. And so the homeowner thought someone's banging on my door, and he's shot. An 11-year-old kid is dead as a result of that. So that's the more extreme side of things, right? Where, you know, any perceived threat, like, you know, if it's the middle of the night and someone's car breaks down, they come and knock on your door and you just come out guns a-blazing, like that's not reasonable. So there's the balance we're trying to find here between that sort of an extreme reaction, but not ending up with a situation like we saw in Ontario where, you know, this guy was a victim, was trying to protect his family, and he's dead as a result.
Yeah, no kidding. We were We heard from a real talker by the name of Cameron, actually, who wrote in just yesterday. We were remembering the story of Carmen Willis. You'll remember this, Rob. I mean, you were broadcasting in Alberta when I was as well. Remember when Weibo Ludwig
yes.
shot at those
Up
two?
in Hythe, Alberta. Yeah.
Exactly. Remember those two pickup trucks out for a 4 a.m.
that's right.
joyride? And I think, I don't know. I mean, who knows? We don't need to revisit this story right now with speculation. That's not productive nor respectful. But, you think like kids being kids, young adults being young adults. Maybe they knew it was Weibo Ludwig's property. They probably did. Get a bit of a thrill ride through there, going into the, sort of the forbidden fruit type idea. I highly doubt that any of them figured that they would sustain gunshot wounds and that one of them would be killed. But, obviously a tragic scenario. And like you said, the stakes are high. I mean, if it's happening here in Texas, or it's happening in Texas, it could certainly happen here in Alberta or anyone else, most especially when there is discussion. I mean, after we talked to you, I'm going to read this big, long email from Marie. She wrote in. She's a rural audience member, and she was, quite frankly, troubled by what she heard on the show and talk around rural crime, and she believes it's just not being taken seriously. And when people start to take things in their own hands, we talked about obviously the terrible tragedy in Saskatchewan as well. That was obviously divided. I think that province and on the shooting and the trial and the verdict and everything else. But you have people that, quite frankly, say, when I don't feel safe, when I feel like my family's not safe, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. It's that whole idea of shooting first and asking questions later, which oftentimes, to state the obvious, has very tragic results. I want to ask you about this one, Rob, in closing, and it's great to see you writing for The Line as well, and people can check that out, readtheline.ca. We'll link to it in the show notes. You wrote a piece, less focus on Ottawa and more on the books, please. This a feature on Alberta for The Line, and I want to give you credit where it's due. Max Fawcett, who probably hasn't promoted absolutely everything that you've ever written, tweeted that you've made some really important and underappreciated facts in your piece. So congratulations on that, but why don't you take us into it? What would you like to see more of from the Alberta government right now?
Well, yeah, it gets back to what we talked about earlier, doesn't it? This whole question of competence. And there's a real focus right now on Ottawa, which is convenient because anything bad going on in Alberta, well, it must be Ottawa's fault. If there's anything good, well, the government can take credit for that. But look, we're in a situation here, and part of the point I was making is just how much spending is ratcheted up under the UCP, sort of compared to some of the almost more modest spending increases under the NDP, and how much less previous governments have had access to in terms of resource revenues. So Alberta's facing now, they're looking at a $6.5 billion deficit for this fiscal year. That was actually up from what was in the budget. And we've got resource revenue at right around $17 billion. So in recent years, it was up to as much as $23-25 billion, which is unprecedented, right? So even though we're just below $20 billion in resource revenues, we haven't seen levels like that in the past. So basically, we put ourselves in a situation where we need unprecedented levels of resource revenues, near record levels of resource revenues, just to balance the budget. Like the Alberta government's running a deficit with almost $17 billion in resource revenues. So that's a problem. That's a real problem, especially if we're in for maybe a prolonged period here of sort of softening of oil prices. It's not like a price crash or anything. And again, we still got, I think, a pretty enviable level of resource revenue flowing in. So I don't think the government can blame Ottawa for that. This is something that's of their own making, and it speaks to a basic competency level here. Like, why are we running deficits right now? And yeah, there's pressure on the Alberta government to spend, and yes, Alberta's population is growing, but I think we expect governments to manage all of that. So that's a less politically convenient conversation. Like we could have town halls going across the province asking some of these questions about revenue and spending and all of this, but that doesn't give them a scapegoat, right? The Alberta Next panels give them a scapegoat, and they can talk about what Ottawa's doing or not doing. And fair enough. I mean, the federal government is not above criticism for sure. But yeah, I think there's some stuff in the government's own backyard that maybe needs to be cleaned up, but that's not as expedient right now.
Yeah, what are your thoughts in closing on the Alberta Next panels? These are, for people not familiar, it's kind of like the Premier's traveling road show in a way. They've been holding these different panels. They've been well attended. They live stream online as well, but you can see them in person. I think they were recently in Grand Prairie. There was another one recently. They're going to go till, I think, about the beginning of October, if memory serves, or at least the end of September. And then there's a couple.
I think the last one's in Calgary, I think the end of this month.
Right. And then they've got a couple of online ones ones, I think, through October, and then they'll wrap up. It's a way to sort of like get out there in the public and to facilitate some debate over policies. Although, like, to be honest, some opinions, some debates have been quashed and others have been amplified, as you might expect in a partisan type scenario like that. But what do you make of the overall value of these, and what can you see them leading to, if anything?
I mean, I think that's the question. What comes of all of this? Does it actually result in any sort of policy change in the Alberta government? Because, look, if there are things being talked about the Alberta government can do, they could do tomorrow, like separate from the Canada Pension Plan and create an Alberta provincial police force and all of these things. So are they going to do that? Does this lead to questions that could be put to the ballot, to a referendum along those lines? So I think that's going to be the task, is what comes of all of this. I think this has been kind of a venting session for Albertans, and who knows, maybe there is some value in that. And maybe it does help to take some of the steam out of the separatist movement, if people have a valve for expressing those frustrations, or it shows that the government's listening. So you can make an argument, maybe there's something there, but otherwise it does seem a little bit contrived, the way that UCP members have sort of had early access to these events, and just how scripted and shaped some of these videos are that are meant to set the table for some of these issues. So it does feel like it's a bit of a political feeder on the part of government. But yes, I think we'll know, in 6 months or a year, whether this had any kind of lasting impact, or whether this was just kind of a convenient little political distraction right now.
Rob, as I feel like I'm still a colleague of yours. We're both going it on our own right now, but you and I did radio together for a lot of years. And I just want to say just how impressed I am by what you're doing right now. Your pivot, you're doing a hell of a job with it. And I'm looking forward to continuing to collaborate with you over the years to come. People can check out your podcast, and they can check out your writing as well. I would say that the main place for them to go, would you agree with me? robbreakenridge.substack.com.
Yep, or even just robbreakenridge.ca. Nice little shortcut will get you there.
Okay,
absolutely.
Perfect. And of course, we always want to make sure that people subscribe to your podcast as well, wherever they find it, whether that's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or elsewhere. You're looking for the Rob Breakenridge Show. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for your insights. And we'll look forward to the next time our paths cross.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, buddy, you got it. That's Rob Breakenridge. Of course, he and I did a lot of radio together over the years, John. Him down in Calgary, me based out of Edmonton. Lots of crossover stuff we'd cover for each other's shows, and I always appreciate his perspective. Nadine's watching in our live chat right now, powered by Park Power, says, who would want to invest in Alberta with all this shit going on right now? Well, Nadine, the good news is we've got a steady hand and a studied voice to give you some insights into whether or not Alberta could actually benefit or be hurt by some of these distractions. Marshall McAllister, he's the founder of North Road Investment Council, and he joined us on the show. This was on the 21st of August. If you didn't yet have a chance to check this out, you can check out the full episode, Marshall's full appearance. Again, that's the 21st of August on our YouTube channel. Thanks to everybody that subscribes there, or anywhere you get your podcast. Or you can find this highlight that John put together. Would Albertans actually get rich by separating from Canada? Some great points made by Marshall. He sort of like takes his high-level understanding of markets and the economy and I guess kind of dumbs it down for the rest of us. That's what they do at North Road Investment Council, and that's why we're really proud to partner with them. North Road Investment Council online at northroadic.com. They've been spending the summer checking in with their clients. These are discerning families and businesses that have seen great success in business, typically in analytical professions. They got like architects and dentists and lawyers, engineers, that are wanting to make sure that their retirement plan, that map that's being plotted out matches the same trend as their careers, which has been well thought out and obviously provided some comfort for their families. But successful saving, as you know, can create unexpected challenges, and that's where the financial advisors at North Road Investment Council come in. You can learn more about what they do or schedule an appointment by visiting their website. That's northroadic.com. While you're there, I encourage you to check out one element of their business that sets them apart from anybody else, and that's what they're doing in the digital risk advisory space. They're leaders within the wealth management industry here, advising clients on ways to help you make better and safer choices in your digitally connected life. You can take a digital risk quiz on their website. That's northroadic.com. Our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy have spent this summer just absolutely hammering down on rooftops, whether it's barns, cottages, houses, office towers, you name it. More Canadians are going solar now than ever before, and that is because, number one, the cost is more accessible. Between the Canada Greener Homes Loan and programs like that Clean Energy Improvement Program, you don't have to shell out the full cost up front to get started. So you can turn your roof, or quite frankly, any extra space, into something that's actually saving you money long term, and the team at Kubi is there to walk you through every step of the way. You can cut your energy bills, make a move toward a cleaner, brighter future. Check out kubi.ca. That's kuby.ca/solar to get your free quote today, or you can always give them a call at 780-340-5829. The team at Solar by Kubi also presenting Positive Reflections, first episode of every show. I'm going to give you a heads up. The next episode, the next edition of Positive Reflections, which is coming up on the 8th of September, that's a Monday, a real talker says her life was literally saved based on an interview she heard here on the show. It's one of the most powerful interviews, or rather one of the most powerful emails we've ever received. A life-saving Real Talk interview. That's going to be the next edition of Positive Reflections, proudly presented by our friends at Solar by Kubi. Athabasca University welcoming thousands of students back as fall classes commence, but of course, you know, there's always a bit of an asterisk when it comes to Canada's Open University, Athabasca University, because their world-class accredited online degrees and courses are designed so you can complete your education wherever and whenever it works for you. That means that while a lot of AU students are getting started this first week of September, some will get started in October, some in November, some in December. You get the idea. It's whatever works with your schedule. You can learn more about how AU works. Find out why more than 94% of AU alumni say that they're satisfied with the quality of their education. It's your education, your way. Not everybody wants to attend a traditional full-time university, and that's why Athabasca University boasts more than 50,000 program and course alumni. Financial supports are available. Student supports are available, including a really remarkable inclusion initiative that we learned more about this summer through our Disability Pride Roundtable. You can find that in our archives. Athabasca University is online all the time at athabascau.ca. Pretty wild story, hey? That story in Ontario, the homeowner woken out of a sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning. A guy with a crossbow in his house. He defends himself with a knife, and he ends up getting charged.
Yeah.
We had some interesting feedback after we talked about this with Supriya yesterday. Not just the crossbow story, but kind of that whole stand-on-guard principle that Pierre Poilievre's talking about, and the idea, not the idea, that's disrespectful. I don't want to call it that. The reality that a lot of Canadians are simply not feeling safe in their own spaces right now. Real Talker Randy sent this in. We promised we wouldn't identify where he is or where he lives, but the shop bat, you can check this out for people on the podcast. Now, Randy wrote in to say this is our shop bat. It's a baseball bat with, I don't know, what are those drill bits coming out of there, or like big nails or some sort of a metal dowel? I don't know what those are. All I know is it looks medieval, and I would not want to be hit with that ever. Randy says, of course, Jespo, this is for display purposes only. But Randy, Real Talker Randy, letting us know that that's how he would intend, or that's how he would protect his own domicile, his own family's property if he were to ever be attacked. We also had an email here from Marie that wrote in to talk@ryanjesperson.com. And this is one where I said to Marie, I replied to her. I said, this isn't going to be a flamethrower because I want to read this in its entirety. I think that it deserves the respect of our attention here. She says, Jespo, after the September 2nd episode talking about crime, and in particular referencing rural crime, she said, to be honest, I just need to vent. I find it really annoying, frustrating when urban folk, when city folk don't appreciate the issues that we have in rural areas, but they sure like to blame us when it comes to the past or present governments, whether we're talking provincial or federal. She says, a little mutual understanding would be greatly appreciated. Marie says, I live halfway between Calgary and Lethbridge, 7 kilometers from the nearest town that actually has an RCMP detachment. If I'm lucky and if I needed RCMP assistance, which has happened, if they're not on another call 50 miles away from us or responding to an accident on Highway 2, the QE2, or the 22, or Highway 3, then they may be able to reach me in a half hour or 45 minutes, but of course by that time I could be dead. She says most city people I know expect some sort of police response in 2 to 5 minutes. So yeah, technically we have protection available to us close by. We also, of course, have neighbors that look out for each other, known as Rural Crime Watch. We keep an eye out for strange vehicles and the comings and goings of people around us. We've developed these skills over generations due to necessity. We don't intentionally go out of our way to kill or to maim intruders, but we sure as hell don't stand by while they inflict harm upon us. She says stealing cattle was a hanging offense in the far past, and today it's a slap on the wrist. You steal a man's cow and it's bad, but you steal a man's horse, I guess, and that should be a hanging offense. She says the last horse that I bought was $10,000, but a well-trained working ranch horse is actually priceless. We can't do our jobs. Marie's the real deal. She says we can't do our jobs without our dogs and our horses. She says a well-trained cattle dog can cost you thousands of dollars as well. She says, I remember back growing up, we never locked things up. Said it just wasn't a thing. In fact, the keys were left in all of our vehicles and all of our machinery, but not now, she says. We spend a lot of worthless time, wasting time running to get keys for every piece of equipment that we need to use. And hopefully the last person that used that equipment hung them back up in the right place where they should be stored. She says, let's just give the thieves access to everything all at the same time, right? She says it just doesn't make sense. She says when a theft occurs in the city, it's usually a loss of belongings. When a theft occurs in rural areas, oftentimes it's the loss of our livelihood. She says you could compare it to a thief breaking your legs so you can't work. She says, now before real talkers, your viewers and your listeners get all bent out of shape, she says, I want you to know that I lived in the city for over 15 years. My husband was born and raised in the city. She says, after we got married, I finally convinced him to move to a smaller town. He thought it was on the edge of planet Earth at the time. She says, I always dreamed of having my own farm with my own livestock. And finally, in 1993, we were able to afford our own farm and moved our family to the country. We've never looked back. She says, my husband learned from me and my family the ways of working cattle without getting killed, looking after horses and kids and dogs and everything else. Says he still learns every day. So what I'm trying to say here, says Marie, is that your urban listeners need to walk a mile in our boots before they go criticizing our ways and our means of defending ourselves and our livelihoods. We don't all vote, by the way, blindly for conservatives, says Marie. We vote for the person who's going to stand up for our way of life. Side note, that's what I was talking about with Rob on the Poilievre strategy with all of this. Marie says we try to vote for the person who's going to stand up for us. And sadly, to be honest, that hasn't worked out for us in many cases. We've seen governments, including those we voted for, close our hospitals, close our schools, reduce municipal funding, and reduce the limited services that we're receiving, all while urban residents are complaining that snow clearing isn't going exactly how they'd like. She says, I wish, Marie says, snow clearing is on me when I've already ensured that the livestock's been fed. Like, how's your septic system working for you, city folk? I have my tank cleaned out once a year. How's your mail service, city folk? I have to drive to town to get my mail while you get door-to-door delivery. And let's not even get started on pizza delivery, says Marie. I deliver it from my oven to the table after making mine from scratch. She says, now I know that some people are going to think I sound like a whiner, and that's definitely not my intention. I would just like for folks to have a bit more compassion and understanding for others and their experiences and ultimately for their problems. I'm really tired of the divisiveness these days. She says, I really seek to understand folks that live differently than me, and I would ask that others do the same. She says, I don't have to agree with your policies or your choices, and you don't have to attack mine. She says, of interest note, I'm working with that Forever Canadian petition, and I'm not a separatist. In fact, in my neck of the woods, says Marie, only one of my neighbors that I know of supports Alberta separation. She says, please keep bringing the issues that matter to the table on Real Talk. Marie says, we really enjoy our morning coffee watching you. Marie, that's music to our ears. She says, the chores have been done, and we can put our feet up for a short while to listen and learn and participate. That's from Marie, who wrote in from her rural southern Alberta home to talk@ryanjesperson.com. How does that make you feel to know that somebody is watching our show at 8:30 in the morning while their chores are done?
Yeah.
Right?
Good for you.
Marie,
that's great.
Marie is an early riser, although I think in some of the farm operations, you don't have much of a choice, you know? Sharon says it's like comparing apples and oranges. We all choose to live where we choose to live. What do you think?
It sounds like Marie needs to move to the city. Sounds like that's what she wants, right?
I don't think she wants that at all.
She doesn't want divisiveness, but she made a laundry list of things urban people complain about.
Isn't she right though?
I don't know. I think if someone gets their laptop stolen in the city, they're not going to be able to work just as much as somebody who gets a piece of equipment stolen in a rural area.
Yeah, I think that she's right though, and when she touches on things like, you know, we are all very spoiled. Like it's incredible right now. Do you remember back in the day, like when you had like even things like calling a cab? And now with like Uber, if I have to wait for an Uber for like 4 minutes, I'm completely frustrated. Skip the dishes if I can only pick from one place that's doing ramen at 11:30 at night. I'm wishing that the service could be better. Like snow clearing. We talked about that woke snow clearing article that Lauren Gunter wrote about this. You remember that?
Yeah,
that got
that wasn't
Abergie
us,
all
though.
fired
We
up.
thought that was ridiculous too.
Yeah.
I thought that was ridiculous too. But I would say I'm grateful. That's why I live in an urban center, because things are so convenient.
Yeah.
But I mean,
trade-offs.
I don't think it's urban people's fault that rural people don't have pizza delivery. I don't think that's, the torch she should be taking up. It's not with us. It's with someone else. It's got to be with someone else other than me.
It's never us. It's not us. I think Marie wants to be understood, and I appreciate that she. I appreciate that she took the time to write in and provide that perspective. Like, it's always interesting, right? Like, we can sit here. Look at this happened just last week on the show. Remember we were talking about return to work? And I, like, kind of went at people that, like, want to work from home 5 days a week and that are refusing or at least really hesitant to move back to the office, and kind of got piled on in the live chat. And I will be honest, I still am a proponent for return to work. That's how I'm wired. That's how I believe that workplaces best function. But we heard from a ton of people and actually followed up. There were more. There's a couple coming up in the flamethrower later this week that wrote in to give us their perspective on why working for home actually doesn't just benefit them, but in their minds. And I think that they make compelling arguments in their corporate situations. They say it actually can benefit their company. And that's something where I always want to approach every single show with an open mind. That doesn't mean that we don't have opinions on things. That doesn't mean that we're always going to change our mind. I don't think it's always about changing your mind. But I do always, like, when we say seek to understand, I do want to hear from other people's perspectives that maybe either I haven't considered or I haven't really respected enough because I've kind of dug in my heels on something. But unless, like Marie says, walk a mile in her boots, walk a mile in her slippers or her sandals or her flip-flops or whatever everybody's wearing from wherever they're living, I think that there's, really good value in that. Sure. Tommy says, I don't even report theft anymore. He says, I just deal with it. I follow a guy on Instagram that has been posting surveillance, like his security camera footage of break-ins in his central Edmonton garage over the past 6 months or so, and it's actually wild the amount of times that his property has not just been compromised, but has been attempted to be broken into. You know what I mean? And I think it's just like, if that's what you're experiencing, whether you're living rural or urban, I think that some people probably have some common feelings on that. This is, again, all part of having a conversation that reflects and represents perspectives from people across the political spectrum, across different geographical areas. And of course, that's something that we want to endeavor to continue to do. So if if Marie's email has kind of lit a fire under you, we'd love to hear your response. We continue these conversations over days and days. It's never a definitive conclusion when we touch on something. A good example would be our episode with Supriya Dwivedi on the 2nd of September. and then this one on the 3rd of September as we continue to pick up those stories as they evolve. When we talked to Supriya in our most recent episode, Alberta had not yet pressed pause on that book ban. So today, of course, we're going to follow up. Tomorrow, it's probably going to be a different conversation with Linda Steele, a beloved broadcaster, formerly an evening news anchor, arguably the evening news anchor in Alberta for a lot of years. She's now plying her trade out in Vancouver on the West Coast, and we're looking forward to checking in with her. We're also going to be talking to Shauna Feth. She's the president and CEO of the Alberta Chambers of Commerce. They've got a lot going on right now, and so we want to make sure Shauna's got her eye on Alberta business, and that's something that we're going to get to in our most recent episode. John, we also wanted to make a bit of an announcement, and this is an episode that I'm very much looking forward to. We've been talking and interviewing one-on-one the candidates, not just the leading candidates, but for the most part, all candidates for the mayor's office in Calgary and Edmonton, and that will continue over the next 6 weeks or so. As a matter of fact, we have a couple of interviews we believe that'll happen this Friday. We're waiting for confirmation. These are going to be the one-on-ones, but Real Talkers, as we wrap this episode, I want to make sure that you circle Friday, the 3rd of October on your calendar. And it is that morning where right here in the historic Mercer Warehouse in downtown Edmonton, we will be joined by Tim Cartmel, Michael Walters, and Andrew Knack. That's right, it's going to be a live streamed Edmonton mayoral debate on the 3rd of October. We hope you'll join us then. Talk soon.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.